Hello and welcome, everyone. I am Sarah McDermott, the founder of PRINDIE, and with me today is Frank Donnangelo, who is the co-writer and the director of the short live-action drama, The Motions. So, Frank, thank you so much just for taking the time out to talk about your film in a little more detail.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful, absolutely. So to give just kind of a quick synopsis of this film, this film is about a very overworked, overtired paramedic, and throughout the course of the 15-minute runtime, we see that she is really hardcore, just avoiding something. She does not want to go home, and as the story progresses, we come to learn that her husband is terminally ill, and he's actually asked her for help in ending his life. And the burden of that request and having to make that decision is it's almost too much to process. It's so difficult.
Mhm.
Um, so Frank, for you, what was the inspiration to tell this story and make this film?
Um, Honestly, it probably seeded from a conversation that I had with like a family member not wanting to go see their terminally ill mother in the hospital because, visiting would only kind of confirm that reality for them. So, rather than not deal with those feelings of impending loss, it was easier for them to pretend that it wasn't happening than accept it. Now some might say that like, wow, what a terrible thing to do, their own mother, and perhaps so, but I'd argue that it's, you know, it's human to have that kind of feeling. But it also made me reflect on like larger moments in my life where, I've chosen avoidance rather than confrontation. Whether it's like a we need to talk kind of conversation of like a breakup or, news of losing a loved one, we all tend to, either deflect or ignore or avoid, these confrontations altogether.
Right.
Um, but yeah, and although like terminal illness plays a part in this film, I would say, The Motions is very much like a story about, relationships, whether it's a relationship of loss or avoidance, but, more specifically the end of a relationship, and hopefully asking the viewer, if the one you love, is wanting out, would you be prepared to let go, I guess, in a way.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah. I to the first point, like I did feel like it was a very human reaction for her to try to be avoiding this. I mean, I feel like I've seen people do that with all levels of different grief, and
Mm,
not necessarily this extreme, but anything that you don't want to confront. And in terms of what you're saying with dealing with the relationships, I found very interesting in this. I mean, of course, there's this question of like, is she going to help him, and the right to die, kind of theme running through. But there was also really this theme of love and like kind of what does love look like what's it supposed to look
mhm.
like, and what she thinks it's supposed to look like versus sort of the reality she got. And I definitely wanted to ask you about that, just the process of sort of exploring that idea, and that it is kind of vague, that she doesn't really have a clear answer.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what my kind of goal was with the film is just to kind of pose the question rather than give um, a, a solid answer, because it's such a muddy kind of gray area, especially under these circumstances. And like, should I, shouldn't I, because I would imagine that these characters had a vision, lives, beyond this. And, you have one kind of accepting that they're not going to get that life that they were envisioning, more so than the other. But yeah, rather than kind of give a concrete answer, I purposely left it, not to say like ambiguous, but just kind of, maybe the idea is kind of thrusting that question onto the viewer, and even more so kind of uh, instilling that emotion of like empathy, and like, how it will, as a viewer, how would I deal with this, and
Mhm.
that's what I was kind of hoping to achieve with that.
I think you do a really great job at sort of being very subtle and sort of just suggesting these different things that do get people thinking like, what would I do? Or thinking just even about the choices that she makes. So,
Mhm.
speaking kind of about her avoidance, like it's again, it's very subtle, but she does have like a fling kind of with her shift partner. And I actually had to go back and kind of look at the beginning again and be like, is that what was going on? Like, cause it's very subtle, but yes, like I I thought it was interesting that you worked that in as well for people to kind of think about, because I don't think the message is that she doesn't care about her husband. Um, it's more like about a grief process.
Yeah, I think in situations, much like these, whatever it is we're avoiding, we might, like a coping mechanism might be kind of like, to fill that void, what can I, what might I like lean on as like a coping mechanism to either, avoid that confrontation or fill that hole that's kind of, been carved out, especially in this circumstance. Like if you have, for instance, our main character, their husband, asking, help and ending his life, you know, you have this void in potentially her heart that's maybe she's wanting to fill with this fling, just to feel something outside of this, her own impending doom, I suppose. But
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. Another part of this that I really, that for me, gave it even more depth is that you did an excellent job of just kind of getting some subtext in there, not just with what they're saying, but also with some of your imagery. And I was very curious about the process of working with your co-writer and like how many drafts you guys went through to sort of weave all that in and come up with sort of the final version that you felt really good about going into production.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Working with Brady, it was definitely my first time, like working with another screenwriter. But I think a lot of the back and forth that we had was mainly just kind of discussing like the larger picture of how the story would unfold. And then I was definitely having a lot of conversations with my cinematographer in terms of like, specific imagery that could evoke certain emotions. So for instance, the shot of this, she waters this plant that's, dying, but the water, the soil is so dry that the water just kind of seeps right through it, and it pools around the table. And the idea there, that I was wanting to convey was like the idea that, like, this, this weight is like, it's so much to hold on to, like it just kind of like slips. There's so much that she's holding on to in her life that like all this is beyond your control, I suppose. So like trying to find moments like that kind of like speak to the theme of the film. These were conversations that we were having, and then we would write them into the screenplay. um, I would say, like, draft wise, I think we might have done, three drafts altogether.
Okay.
But yeah.
That's definitely not too bad, because you definitely hear about writers doing like 100
Oh, yeah.
before they get it to be just what they wanted. And that image that you mentioned, that was one of the images that I wrote down, because I think that is a particularly powerful moment when she's watering the plant and it just goes through. And yeah, you really get that sense. So I think you did a really good job conveying that for sure.
Thank you.
So what sort of thought process went into the choice of making her a paramedic as well? So was that like a very conscious choice in terms of the story, or was it just something you
Yeah.
come up with to try?
Yeah, I thought, I thought it would be interesting to have like the main character's job be something of like a caregiver in a way, um, where here they are on their day-to-day job acting as like a paramedic, potentially saving people's lives. Sorry, I think there's like a flare. Saving people's lives, and then here at home, you have somebody who's terminally ill, and one of her coping mechanisms is choosing that second shift rather than go home just to avoid the conversation. But I thought it was an interesting juxtaposition to have, somebody whose profession is, saving lives, and here at home, potentially ending one. um, I think there's probably a longer version of the story that, maybe uh, she does decide to help, or if she does decide to help, maybe she can get um, something from her work that helps out with that request.
Is that something that you guys have thought of doing, like expanding it into a
Yeah,
feature?
I mean, it's on a back burner for sure. Right now, I'm trying to focus on writing the second drafts of this feature that I've been working on mostly over pandemic times. But yeah, that it's definitely something that I've been thinking about as well.
Okay, nice. I know one thing with pandemic is, at least for writers, you've had there's been some time to kind of sit and just be with the writing. Yeah,
Hmm.
for sure. But yeah, I mean, I thought that was an interesting choice that she was a paramedic, and it sort of also gave you guys this opportunity. We got to see like another example of a wife losing a spouse in like a very different way, but you were sort of able to give us that different version, which was also
Yeah.
just interesting. Yeah, interesting to include. For
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. The idea behind that was just kind of showing like, yeah, again, like the juxtaposition in terms of like how somebody could be dealing with the potential loss of a loved one, and here she is potentially saving or not saving this person as well. But
So I wanted to ask you too about your title, because I thought the title choice was very interesting. I don't know if you came up with the title early on in the process or later, but you hear the motions, and of course we're dealing with marriage, and people hear the motion, like you start going through the motions. But here, of course, it means something a little bit different, or maybe not so much, because it's still like a lot of mundane stuff that has to that has to
yeah,
happen. But yeah, so when at what point did you guys choose that title, and what was the
it
process for you?
honestly, it was kind of early on. And yeah, it was early on because I wanted to with this piece I definitely wanted to explore just like uh, when you're avoiding something, you're kind of, you're going through the motions of just like everyday life, trying to maybe put it out outside of your mind so you don't have to deal with it. So you're doing everything but, or almost everything but. So that, that idea of like, yeah, okay, maybe this is called going or the motions. And then, for the longest time, I kept on with the rest of my team, kept on trying to think of like, oh, is that an all right title? It seems kind of hokey. Oops, sorry. Seems kind of hokey, but uh, yeah, we just ended up sticking with it.
Nice. I actually liked it because I liked that it again, you hear it and you think like mundane, but then you realize it's sort of a process. Even when you're dealing with like life or death, it's sort of this
Mm,
process. And I thought it was a really good title. So
thank you.
very nice. So another thing that I noticed, and I know you've put a lot of thought into every aspect of this. You talked about working with your cinematographer and everything. I also noticed in terms of sort of like your soundscape, you actually don't have any like music sort of happening in the background through this. And I'm guessing that also was like a very artistic choice.
Yeah,
Um, yeah. So what was
yeah. It's funny because like I enjoy writing to music quite a bit, and I had like a whole kind of playlist for as I was writing this. Down, but when it came to post production and putting the edit together, it I working with my editor, I thought a lot of the soundscape could just be carrying us through, and I felt like that it would heighten the stillness in some of the scenes rather than rely on like a score that kind of takes us through scene to scene. I thought how long can we ride you know the edit without putting in some music, and then it turns out like oh, let's just try the whole film. And so it became more atmospheric, rain, breathing at the end. Yeah, so like yeah, so I just felt like it didn't really need music, ultimately.
very cool. Now, was this a difficult project for you to cast? Like, did you have a hard time finding the right person to play Mara?
Ye- you know yes and no. Like I definitely went into it pretty open-minded, but all the Maras that I ended up seeing, they were all playing the part very similar, in the sense that like the sides that I gave for the audition, it was like it was a section of the script that was pulled from kind of like near the argument there at the end, and I might have saw 4 or 5 different actors to play Mara, and they're all kind of like hitting the same notes. Yell when they felt like it was time to yell, cry when they felt like it was time to cry. And I was just like, I don't know, it's this is all kind of it's fine. And then I saw Yaz, and she was recommended to me by a friend of mine named Lane, who plays the husband. He said, "Oh, I've worked with her on a couple of things. Give her a shot." And so I had her come in an audition, and she flipped the character. She became much more physical with the husband character. Even in her audition, like she decided to hit him rather than like resort to kind of like this woe is me crying. Like she got really angry with him, like essentially how dare you ask me this stuff or bring this conversation up again. So that was very surprising, and on her end, something that she probably could have done the audition in the sense of like the safe route, but she chose to make a choice and step out of that box. And I really enjoyed it, loved it, and so I ended up casting her just because she took a chance with it.
Cool. I feel like that's such a great casting story, and I feel like that's such great advice for any actors who may be watching this, to go ahead and you can make a risky choice and it might really pay off. That's really cool. So with this film, now that you've started to show this film, and I know you've been in other festivals and things, because it does have that subject matter, and again, I think you do a good job of kind of letting people make up their own mind about it. It does have that subject matter about the right to live or die, and you don't really comment on it, but has this caused any sort of controversial reaction with other people seeing it, or not so much?
No, not that I know of. I know it's definitely something that like I believe came up legislation wise here in California. I think it was passed. But yeah, in terms of like controversy with the subject matter, or yeah, it hasn't come up, to be honest.
I mean, and I think you do such an amazing job of really just making it about the character's emotions and everything, more so than that issue.
Yeah, I think relationships, the relationships between characters, for me, like I always try and prioritize that over, plot or whatever the subject matter is. I feel like it's more interesting to see how people are interacting with one another or not interacting with one another.
So what is next for you? I know you mentioned that you are working on another feature. I don't know if you're at liberty to share any details, but
yeah. So I'm working out a feature screenplay right now that polishing up a first draft, and I guess it's essentially about a guy going back home to take care of his dad, and him and his brother are deciding whether or not to put him in a nursing home. And the reason why I wanted to explore that kind of subject matter is it seems like I'm American, but like it's a very American thing to like when parents get of certain age, it's like, well, do we put them in a nursing home? And then it's like they get put in a home, and then you just, I don't know, you don't really see them anymore, or you see them as often. Whereas like, other countries or other cultures, they kind of like bring them into your own home, and, you kind of take care of, you take care of your parent that way. And they just become part of your everyday life, I suppose. So like that was something that I wanted to explore subject matter wise.
Okay, very cool. And I feel still like it's sort of the similar themes of making choices, and to a certain extent, mortality and all these things.
Yeah, it kind of carries over a similar theme.
Very cool. Well, Frank, I mean, thank you so much just for taking the time to kind of talk about your film with us a little bit more. For everybody watching, PRINDIE 2020 this year, a virtual film festival with everything going on from September 10th to the 13th. So make sure to check it out. Make sure to see the motions. And Frank, just thank you so much again. This is really great.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.